Welcome, folks. Great to have you joining us again, and it's good to finally be back. Guess what? I'm off jury duty, so I know. Listen, I went to fulfill my obligation, but apparently they didn't want me. They found the jurors, and they didn't need me, but I got to spend the whole day in court yesterday, and my guest has spent many days in court, way more than I ever have. And please welcome John Howler. And John, great to have you with me. This is my first day back from, I was in Mexico, I was doing all kinds of things. It's just great to be back, and you're my first guest.
Well, I'm glad to be that, Tom, and I'm glad that you, I never got to serve on a jury, and Pam did, and I often wonder as a trial lawyer, this is completely off topic, but you often wonder what happens in a jury room, the jury room, because as lawyers, we work on a case for years. You know, we will work 2 or 3 years to put a case together. We take depositions, look at documents and all that, and then we put the case on, and then inevitably the jury will come back with a question that is like so far out of left field, none of the lawyers can, and the judge, we can't imagine how the jury came up with that. And it's like, what case were you listening to? And then we sit back as lawyers and we try to interpret what the jury's question really means. And we do that without the clients around, because we don't want the clients seeing that a lot of stuff came up that we didn't really talk about.
Hey, that happens when you're giving messages too.
Well, I was just going to make that point that it's also like our Bible prophecy stuff. You know, we talk about something and then we get these emails and questions that are like, where did that come from? And so that's the problem. But you're someone who believes in truth. And in today's world, you're likely to get struck off a jury by the party that wants to appeal to feelings.
Well, so I was in the first pool, right? And I don't want to bore everybody with this. So we'll move on to what you guys came here for in just a second. But I'm in the first pool, so I was in there all day long. They got the first set of jury people they're going through for selection. And I wasn't in the first set, but they ended up keeping almost everybody from the first set. But what I got to do was sit through all the questions they asked, and I thought, they're going to, as soon as they put me on there, they're going to kick me out, because I thought every answer I give, one of them was, what do you do for a living? And the problem was the type of case. I think there's no way that they're going to have me on here. And then it was, do you know any police officers? I'm thinking. So
your case, it might be, do you know anybody who's not a police officer?
Well, yeah, and I thought it was anyways, it was kind of a fun day, you know. But I'm glad, boy, am I glad to be back. Glad to be doing this with you too. And by the way, before we even get started, John and I want to give a shout out to Roddy Harrell from Jerusalem in the Old City. It's midnight there right now, but I know he's going to be watching this as soon as he gets up. He watches everything we do. So, Roddy, God bless you. Looking forward to seeing you soon. John and I will both be there in October, and I think you know that, Roddy. So it's going to be great being in Israel, back in Israel. And Huckabee's letter apparently had some positive effect. If we have time, we'll get into that. I kind of already covered that yesterday, though. But okay, are you ready, John?
I think I'm ready to roll.
This is going to be fun. It's always fun with you. So you did a message just 2 days ago. What was it, alliances upon alliances or something like that?
It was just sort of a play on words. Here an alliance, there an alliance. You know, I was going to go on everywhere in alliance.
Yeah.
E-I-E-I-U-O me or something like that. But that was too long of a title, so.
So I get it. Here an alliance, there an alliance, and watching all types of things. I was really paying a lot of attention. I know you and I text back back and forth a little bit while I was gone, and some other folks, and I just really wanted to get into some of what I was watching taking place. But we live in amazing days, and now we are watching Syria just descend into a hellhole. As many of us predicted, you can't trust Giuliani, who puts on a suit and then changes his name. But all these alliances with an attempt to bring some type of peace. We got the Abraham Accords. So, John, let me ask you this. For everybody to get up to speed, they hear Abraham Accords, even people in the prophecy world, I don't think the majority of them still get it. So maybe you can explain and work this out with some of the things you talked about the other day. What are the Abraham Accords, and why are they significant geopolitically and prophetically?
So I personally think that there's a synergy I'll start with the last part of your question first. There's a synergy between the prophetic aspect of the Abraham Accords tied to, I think, Psalm 83, because if you look at the Abraham Accords, and if you look at the recent pictures that were posted on billboards around Israel, in Hebrew and in English, they were done by an organization called Abraham Shield. But if you look at the pictures, it's a very interesting picture, and that picture and so many other things I've seen over the last couple of weeks lead me to this conclusion. When you see secular people, secular unchurched people, or secular people that have really messed up theologies and spirituality, speaking in terms that track the prophetic scripture passages.
Hey, John, can you move your mic a little bit closer to you?
Sure.
Okay.
Like peace and is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. Like peace and security, Peter Thiel was running around doing interviews, just an interview with the New York Times, in which the last part of this, now Peter Thiel is a big technocrat, transhumanist, AI, Palantir, PayPal, all these tech companies. So he's a technocrat that Patrick Wood that we talked about on our round tables. And what is he talking about? He's talking about eschatology, Armageddon, and the Antichrist. And so you see these pictures from this organization called Abraham Shield. It's an actual organization that kind of came on the scene in January of this year. And it's made up of a lot of security experts. Some of them are people that I've interviewed, like Miri Eisen, very wonderful, smart lady. And their orientation, Tom, is that they're sort of still tied to a two-state solution. And so they put up these things, about the Abraham Accords, and it had a picture of Trump and Netanyahu in the middle, and then there were 6 Middle Eastern leaders to their right and 4 to their left, 10 kings. Now, I'm not saying those are the 10 kings, but if you look at these different areas that are coming into the Abraham Accords and are on the verge of coming into the Abraham Accords, there's a pretty good track between the people groups mentioned in Psalm 83 and the Abraham Accords. And one of them says, when you translate the picture, and by the way, you can take a picture, save it, and then go to Google, translate.google.com, drop the picture into the window there. It'll translate it for you of almost any language on the planet. It says a new Abrahamic Covenant. That's the language that's the language that I'm using. So my point is, when you see secular people that may not know about our eschatology or anything, talking in terms that are tied to our eschatology, then I think you really ought to start paying attention to it, because as we've said ad nauseum over the years, everything is converging and accelerating and happening all at once.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to come back to, we haven't got to the geopolitical side yet. I want to get a little bit further into it, because I love your explanations on these things. But sticking with the prophetic for just a second, you talk with Bill Koenig. I love it when Bill on the program. He's very insightful. I'm curious as to your thoughts, and maybe Bill's. I need to ask Bill sometime, but you probably did. When the Abraham Accords first came up, was it 2020? spring of 2020?
Yeah, it was in 2020.
Okay.
It was done under the auspices, mainly headed up by Jared Kushner. And if I could just add real quickly, the American Spectator has a big article, Spectator World, in their current issue, has a big article, "Where is Jared Kushner?" And the answer is he's still actively involved, talks to Trump all the time, and is working behind the scenes.
So, and I believe he also does a lot with Witkoff. Is that correct?
He's very close to Witkoff. He's also close to Mohammed bin Salman, who was one of the guys in the picture from the Abraham Shield. One of the, I guess you could say, 10 kings or princes that they had. It's just, I don't know, it's just so odd. But by the way, the picture that they use in the American Spectator article is the same picture they used on the cover of their magazine back in 2020. It was a picture of Jared Kushner dressed in a sort of a black and red robe, and the cover title said "The Prince."
It is so, I mean, this whole thing is so fascinating. When I look at the term, and this has bothered me since 2020, right? And I look at, it's called Abraham Accords. All right, when I look at that, when I read, okay, Abraham Accords, Abraham Covenant, I only know of one Abrahamic covenant that we can give the glory and the praise to God for. And so when I just see, I look at the name and I think that to me is, it's concerning, just the name alone.
Right. Well, it's interesting that when I translated one of the Hebrew billboard signs that was in Tel Aviv, it said "A New Abrahamic Covenant." And by this way, it gets Abrahamic and New Covenant all in the same sentence.
So,
and I'm saying this is not from people that are trying to push a particular eschatological view, but I think it's something that's ought to be to us say, whoa, okay, now we need to pay. This is something we should pay attention to.
Craig, point. Can you pull that picture up again, the billboard? Okay, John, you see it. That's the billboard you were talking about, not the Jared Kushner one you were referring to.
Right, the Abraham Alliance. There's one in Hebrew, and when you translate it on Google Translate, it's the exact same picture. It just has some different Hebrew writing on it. It says "A New Abrahamic Covenant," and it comes from that organization called Abraham Shield. And look, they're all about, and like I said, I know some of these people. You know some of these people that are involved in that organization. They come from think tanks and security organizations in Israel. And they really are tied to the two-state solution. And I'm just saying is, we talk, it's like, well, Israel will never agree to that and it'll never happen. But then, the one thing that we don't know is maybe it's shoved down their throats. Maybe there's something that really brings Israel to that point. And you're seeing a lot of pressure right now from the Trump administration to Netanyahu, get this thing in Gaza resolved. Mm-hmm. And so what does the pressure happen? Because look, let's be honest. There's a great poster graphic that one of Erdogan, Turkey's newspapers made up. And it's like the perfect Ezekiel 38 map, but it also has statistics on that of how many people in the Muslim world, 1.6 billion, versus Jews versus Israel, which is 15 or 8 million. And they compare the military budgets and everything. And the one thing that's pretty clear is that Israel's fantastic in their military, but I just don't think they can do it alone right now. They're probably years away from being self-sufficient in manufacturing all the ammo and missiles and everything that they need. Their tech is great. They're doing great on Iron Beam, but they need other people to help. And so the question is somebody going to force that two-state solution down their throat as a way to force them into this? And from a prophetic standpoint, when we look at Joel, the reason for the judgment of the nations in Joel is, He brings them down in the valley of Jehoshaphat and will judge them there because they've divided my land. So sometimes in Bible prophecy, at least I'm starting to do this more, is I sort of start at the end and work back. So for example, when I see in Daniel chapter 9, it says that the Antichrist, I think this is about the Antichrist, he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So we start with that event, and then we work back. Well, what do they have to do to get there? Well, to stop the sacrifice and oblation, it has to be restarted. And for it to be really restarted, there has to be something with regard to the Temple Mount. And we're seeing things. I don't know if you know what happened in Hebron, right? Last week?
With the sheiks?
Well, the sheik was one that was very significant, but the Machpelah,
right, yeah.
They turned management of that from a Muslim authority over to a Jewish authority. So I photoshopped the thing and I put up the tomb of Machpelah, the tomb of the patriarchs, and I put under new management on a banner on the side of it and sent it to some of my friends in Israel. And they loved it. But understand, everybody, that that's the second holiest Jewish site. And as we're sitting here talking about the sheik, and he wants to come into the Abrahamic Accords, the sheik of Hebron, the clans that are in the tribes in Hebron, because Arab society is based on tribes and clans. He wants to leave the Palestinian Authority, wants to normalize things with Israel. And now all of a sudden, the management of the Tomb of the Patriarchs, at least my understanding is, has been turned over to a Jewish authority. You understand that this has not happened for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. For hundreds of years, the Jews who wanted to go there to pray, not to pray to Abraham's tomb, but to pray there, remembering what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives meant to them as a nation and people, they were, for hundreds of years, they were restricted to what they call the seventh step there at the tomb of the patriarchs. They could only go up to the wall, and the wall's very dirty in that area, if you look, because that's where they went to pray. That's the only place for hundreds of years. That changed in 67. So now we have the second holiest Jewish site being turned over to Jews for management in the context of all these things we see happening with the Temple Mount. Is the Temple Mount going to follow this pattern? Is that tied to things with regard to the Abrahamic Accords? I don't think it's very difficult for us to sort of grasp all the things that could happen in very short order.
It really is. I want to bring up a couple of things that you have mentioned and then go further into them. One of them is, will the Daniel 9:24 covenant be imposed upon Israel? You first said that, John, to me probably a year and a half ago, and you said you believe that was it. What's interesting, about a week after you said that, there's an article that appeared coming out of Europe where it was the European leaders had gotten together and said peace needs to be imposed upon Israel. And I haven't forgotten about that, because as we look at the dynamics of what's going on, Trump saying we're done with Gaza, which is essentially how I read what Trump says. We have to finish the Gaza thing. We got to move on. It's peace at any cost. Hence, he brings Jolani into the picture as if he's going to be part of the peace, and the guy from Turkey. And then on Hebron, and looking at that, there's some very interesting dynamics taking place. And this all ties in together because, so the sheik says, hey, Israel has the right, this is their land, basically is what he says. And then you have this with Machpelah, right, with looking at this place that was purchased in Israel's history by the Jews. Well, I think it was Abraham who purchased, who was it that purchased it? Was it Abraham or was it?
Abraham.
Okay, so
Abraham purchased it from Machpelah. He, by the way, Machpelah wanted to give it to him, but he said, no, I want to buy it.
Which is
30 shekels of silver, I think, was the price.
It's so interesting when you look at these things. But what's happened since then, in the last few days, the PA came down on the sheik and said, you're going to keep your mouth shut because we are not going to enter into some kind of an agreement and let Israel have this land. So it's interesting. We have a back and forth going on with Gaza. I believe you and I would both agree Israel has to be victorious in both Judea and Samaria and in Gaza because, listen, Ezekiel, John, I look at Ezekiel 38 isn't going to happen while Israel is dealing with all of these significantly problematic areas. But as we see these little steps going forward, it's like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And that would be one of them there in Hebron. And looking at dynamics that are taking place on the Temple Mount, I find it very interesting to see. I think it was Yehuda Glick was back up there the other day. Did I see that right?
I think that's right. I mean, they're actually going up there and praying and dancing and singing.
Yeah, and so we have these things that are taking place. And
that hasn't happened for like 2,000 years.
It is so interesting to see this taking place, and like you said, it could change in a moment. All of a sudden, Israel could be at this place of peace. However, we see a give and take constantly, and we know where it's going to end up, but we don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to get there or when it's going to get there. But Trump, I personally believe, is an enormous factor in what is going on right now, whether it's because he's empowered Jared Kushner or whatever. Either way, I personally believe between Trump's attitude and the way he does things is significant for the time we live in to, I don't know, maybe impose some types of peace. I'm certainly not saying Trump is the Antichrist, but just look at these dynamics. It's just fascinating to be alive right now and see all of the world's attention in that area. And then you mentioned the second most holy site in Israel to the Jews. And to see these things.
Yeah, and Tom, I was talking to somebody this morning about that, or I started typing up some of the thoughts I've been having. And at the same time that we see this, and you and I will both cover as much of these, like if it's possible, my tour will get to Machpelah, to the Tomb of the Patriarchs, because it's such an important site, and a lot of it, it's not that easily accessible depending on the security situation. So I'm going to try to get there by any means possible. But the other thing I've been thinking about, I interviewed Duran Spillman from JNS, who has a new book out called When the Stones Speak, I think it's called, about the archaeological discoveries in the city of David. And you've talked about them. We've talked about them together on this program. And the interesting thing, Tom, is this convergence of the things that the Jews lost in 70 AD and that the Muslim invasions and the Ottomans took away from them. They're all being restored to them as the historical sites, the city of David, Hebron, Shem, Shiloh, all of these things. Archaeological discoveries are being made that confirm their presence in the land, and they're back in the land. When all the other geopolitical stuff is happening, I'm amazed at how significant this is, and I think sometimes we just don't step back and acknowledge how significant it really is.
It's huge. I think of the prophecies where you read, God says, "I'm about may the land bring forth its fruit and its juices," or whatever. Its glory, for I'm about ready to bring my people home. And what do we see taking place right now? You see the vineyards, you see the orchards, you see all these different things that are all over Israel. Every time you go there, you see more and more of it. And in areas where people would say nothing can ever grow here, whether it be in Galilee or whether it be on the rocky hills of Judea, and you see it, God says, "I'm bringing my people back home. Get ready to the land."
My friend Hillel Fold had a post on X just today, where he said, if you're a Jew and you come back, you make Aliyah, you come back to Israel, the shawarma's on me. So he took these people out. The family looked like a very young couple. They moved back. They don't speak Hebrew. They're Jewish. They have 9 children. So I imagine the bill at the restaurant was pretty high. But the guy came back. He didn't really have a job, but he's coming back because this is the only safe place for Jews. Even after October 7th and all that, this is the safe place for Jews in the world. And that's becoming increasingly true everywhere, even in the United States. Jewish people are feeling under assault. And rightfully so, they should feel under assault because they are being assaulted intellectually and other ways.
Indeed. Okay, so let me ask you this, John.
Have we gone down enough rabbit trails already?
Well, yeah, well, let's go down another one. So as we look at the Bible is very clear. God's very clear. I will call my people back home from the north, the south, the east, and the west. Both Jeremiah and Isaiah write about that. He's talking about in the latter days. I'm going to call them back. And they've been coming from the north, the south, and the east, and the west, definitely out of Europe. But now they're starting to go back home from the U.S. Do you believe before, just curious, because I think through this, and you go, okay, well, what is the timing of this? Will these Jews need to be going back home in huge numbers from places from America prior to the tribulation beginning? Because we've already seen them, the north, the south, and the east, and the second most populous place for Jews is here in America, by far. I mean, there's nothing else that even comes close to it.
Yeah, but Tom, that's interesting you bring that because the biggest population centers of Jews in the United States are New York and Los Angeles. And I would suggest to you, when you have a radical Islamist, Marxist guy looking like he's going to become mayor of New York City, and you have a large Orthodox community in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, and also in the Fairfax area and Beverly Hills areas of Los Angeles, and you have the assaults, the protests and everything against them, not based on anything factual or anything like that, but just based on mainly made up myths. But it's kind of centered right now in the 2 most significant Jewish communities in the United States. And I mean, what are they going to do? I mean, and we see it happening in the UK, by the way. And I saw a Jewish person in the UK recently said, or there was a statement made, I think this is the Times of London newspaper, Jews need to leave the UK because they're not safe anymore. Well, where are they going to go?
Yeah. Well, okay, now that's an interesting point. They don't want to come back to Los Angeles and New York too. But yeah, where are they going to go? So they're not allowed to be in Israel because they're so-called colonizers, which is a lie, but nevertheless.
Right, or fake Jews.
They're fake Jews.
Would say,
tell that to the Muslim world because they want to kill them all because they're real Jews, right? But,
I know.
but you look at, okay, so they're not allowed to be there, but you don't want to, so where are they going to go? This is going to get to that point where they're going to say, well, hence we've got to eliminate them. That is where this is going, and I see it turning. And I'm pretty sure you see the exact same thing I do. Brandon and I have talked about this. I think you and I have probably talked about this. Within the church, there is a definitely anti-Israel significant growth pattern that's taking place. And
sometimes it's, if I could just interrupt, it's subtle sometimes. So I saw an article by one of these Christian apologists recently. And and somebody said, "Oh, look at this article about all the occult being in Israel, because they had a pagan festival in the desert." And I'm like, "Okay, we know that, we know that they've come back in unbelief. We get that. We know that it was prophesied. Why should we be surprised about that?" But what this guy was doing was a very subtle, maybe not so subtle form of anti-Semitism. Because he writes about the pagan festival in Israel. Okay, that's fine. But what about Burning Man and all this stuff in the United States? And I guarantee you can search this guy's archives and it never brought up. But the Jews do it, and we got to talk about it.
Yeah. Well,
that's anti-Semitism.
It is, and it is very subtle. In fact, on August 3, I've got a night set up just for that. Remember I asked you a while back if you're going to be out in August?
Right.
You said no. So David Towell's going to be taking your spot. And we're going to be in Temecula. And I'm dealing with that because the reality, okay, God doesn't ignore the fact that Israel's got issues. Like you said, they're gathered back in unbelief. Ezekiel chapter 36 is very clear. God says, wherever I scattered you, you profaned my name. But I'm going to bring you back because my name is on the covenant. In Joel chapter 3 at the end, where you already quoted it, where God talks about the people of the world, they've gathered against Israel, they seek to divide the land. He says, these are my people. This is my heritage, Israel. This is my nation. And look what you've done. Clearly, and God, they're still his people. He's going to honor his covenant. And when you also, in Revelation chapter 11, God calls Jerusalem out. He says, hey, the city of Sodom, where the Lord was crucified. We know Tel Aviv is like the gay capital of the world. But what about, why do you focus in on the sins of Israel within the church, but you forget about the sins of the whole world? For Christ came.
Agree 100% with that. Perfect point.
Look what Islam, look what Jelani's doing in Syria. The Western media won't say a word about the slaughter that is happening to the Druze and to the Christians. They're not a word about it. As soon as the IDF comes to rescue them, oh, look, now they're here to commit another genocide. Are you kidding me? Jelani, or whatever, I don't even know what the guy's changed his name to.
Al-Shara, I think is the name he's using now.
That guy's committing genocide. But the media, it's unbelievable what takes place. And you watch this, you go, what? It's more evidence, John, as you know, this is a spiritual battle. If somebody can't see it, your eyes have to be spiritually blind to what is taking place.
Somebody sent me a picture this morning, Tom, of a picture of the bridge across the Thames River going towards Westminster Abbey, where they have the British Parliament, and it was packed with people. And it says, protest against Gaza. Then the next picture was the bridge empty, nobody on the bridge, and it said protest against the Druze and that was happening to the Druze in Syria.
Yeah,
and that's true. You go down to Columbia, go to UCLA, go to all these universities, and tell me all the protests you're seeing about the Druze being slaughtered in Syria. And I'm watching videos, Tom. It's ISIS all over again.
It is, and this time it is all over the West. If you go back, we go back to the time of the rise of ISIS. What was that, like 2011 or something like that?
Yeah, 2013 to 2016, somewhere in that time frame.
Okay, I know Obama was president at the time. That much I remember.
That's just a coincidence of history.
You have the rise of ISIS. You have, but it was pretty much localized to those areas, right?
Syria and Iraq.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but now what's happened is this is all over the free world, the Western world. U.S., Europe, it's everywhere. And it's celebrated. And we live in a time where there's such mass deception that's taking place that people support. Well, for one thing, John, they don't know the difference between a man and a woman, at least in American politics and universities. And the other thing is they're thinking they're supposed to support the terrorists.
Yeah, look, what you see in Syria is just awful. And by the way, I will just say a political point is this Barrett guy, whoever is our ambassador to Syria or Lebanon or whatever, they need to get rid of that guy. He does not know what he's doing. And people in the State Department don't know what they're doing. And I'm very distressed that the U.S. government just it was last week, I think. I think I played a clip of Marco Rubio lifting sanctions on Syria on my update on July 13th. They lifted the sanctions that had been put on the Syrian government. And less than a week, they're slaughtering the Druze. somebody needs to be held accountable for that, because that was a huge unforced error, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, you know this better than anybody, John, when it comes to these nations, so many of the, well, if you go back to that billboard picture, you have Al-Jilani or Al-Shari or whatever his name is.
Al-Shara is
He's
in that
there.
picture.
You got Erdogan's in the picture. So you have, you have these different, these guys don't get along in real life. They hate each other, right? And they hate their own people. They'll slaughter, which they're doing, they're slaughtering their own people. Yet somehow you're going to bring them together in some type of peace agreement. It's clearly not working. And as you mentioned, as soon as Marco Rubio says no more sanctions, listen, this is the heart of these people. They're full of wickedness. They are terrorists.
Yeah, the question was whether Al-Jilani / Al-Shara was reformed somehow by becoming president. And so what have we seen? And you see this happening over and over in Syria. They started in Latakia province, which is Alawite, which is where the Assad family came from. They took the body of al-Assad, of Bashar, or of Hafez al-Assad from his mausoleum in the city where he was buried. That was kind of not mentioned by a lot of people. They have burned and slaughtered Alawites, who most Islamic sects, even the Iranians, think they're heretics, but the Iranians will use them for their own benefit. You know, that's the Iranians will kind of overlook it for a little while, then we'll come kill you later. So they kill the Alawites. Al-Shara, Al-Jilani goes, oh, that was a mistake. That was an accident. No problem. Okay, so now we're going to list. Okay, we thank you so much, Al-Jilani, for, being willing to bend what you believe in the past and how you've acted in the past. So now we'll lift sanctions, and now they're going after the Druze. And then Al-Jilani gives this speech last week. I translated it, and it was like, look, some people, they got out of control, and we're trying to restore democracy here, and we really want to get along with everybody. And so we'll be sending in patrols. So they're sending in patrols now, and they're slaughtering whole families. They slaughtered a pastor, his wife, children, and other people in Syria just the other day, 20 people altogether, Christians. Has Tucker Carlson, has Candace Owens, has any of these woke right people said a word about that? And the answer is they've not said a word. And the fact that they haven't said a word ought to tell you everything about what they're about.
Absolutely. So when they say they're not anti-Semitic, well, why is it that you only bring up the Jews and you bring up even things that aren't true regarding Israel?
For example, we have the church. That was, remember this thing over the last few days about the church that was supposedly burned up in Samaria? Mm-hmm. So I saw a video yesterday of an archaeologist who went to the church. It's made of stone. Last I saw, stone doesn't burn. They had burned some fields around it. It was a completely made up false fabrication, and the media and all these people on the woke right, I saw them do it, ran with it, and never investigated whether it was true or not.
Yeah. Now I saw a few different of these so-called burnings. Which one was that?
The church, it began with a T. Tabia or someplace like that.
Okay, so that actually, the fire, so this is one with the farmland, right? Where there was farmland
burned around
the fire was started, and the evidence is all there. It was started by the Muslims who hate the Jews.
Right.
And then the Jewish farmer comes out to start to put out the fire with his friends. The media comes in, and you got film of the Jewish farmers putting out the fire, but the Western media spins it to say, look, the Jews actually started the fire. The whole thing is a fabricated lie. But will you have that corrected? No, I can have that corrected.
And that story is happening over and over and over again with settlers in Israel. There are some bad settler kids and stuff like that. I'm not going to say that that's not true. But what they do is they're provoked, and they respond, and then the media shows up.
And the media, so, I mean, as we found out in Gaza, was totally complicit in much of what was going on in Gaza, running in there with their cameras with the terrorists and filming what they wanted to film. And look
I saw Drew's holy sites in Syria being desecrated, things ripped off the walls and stuff like that by these ISIS-type gangs that are operating with the authority of the Syrian government. And the guys doing it had vests on that said press on them.
Jeez. All right. I mean,
I have the videos.
It is unbelievable, the lies. And we have to, Israel's definitely losing the propaganda war. They may be winning other things, but they're losing the propaganda war. We need to get the truth out there. And I'm sure, John, this video is going to get lit up by many people. Calling us whatever they want to call us.
Yeah, Zionists. Make sure you spell it with a capital Z, please.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, so let me ask you about Turkey.
Okay.
Do you believe that Turkey could possibly play the role of Gog in Ezekiel's prophecy, or you said for a long time, keep your eyes on Turkey?
Yeah, well, that came from a conversation that we had at the dinner table, Bill Caney, Chuck Missler, and I asked Chuck, are you excited about what, and this is like, goodness, Tom, it has to be 16 or 17 years ago. And at the time he just said, yeah, I am, but I'm watching Turkey. And when I see Turkey start to change, then I'm going to get excited. So Erdogan has been the leader of Turkey for a while. I saw a very good editorial cartoon. It had like stair steps. And the first step was prime minister. The next step was president. And then the next step was sultan. And it was like a throne. And Erdogan was walking up the steps because he was prime minister. They changed the constitution. He became president. Needs to run for election again, but he said he's not going to run for election, and it may mean that he's just going to appoint himself as sultan. I mean, that's one interpretation of what he says. So I've watched Erdogan for a very long time. I've told you about that poster he had for a rally that was in Istanbul, January 1st. Yesterday, Hagia Sophia, the largest church in Christendom, which he turned into a mosque. Today, Damascus had just fallen to the Al-Shara people, which there is no question, absolutely zero question. Even Trump said it. Erdogan, that is very clever what you did in Syria. And Erdogan says, well, I didn't do that. And Trump says, listen, I know what you did. We all know what you did. He funded that. And that took years, Tom, for that to happen. And then it happened like so many of these things happened gradually, then suddenly. And then in 8 days, Syria fell. And then in that poster, he also said, tomorrow, Al-Aqsa, we're going to get the Jews in Jerusalem. And you talk to our friend Roddy and everything, and they will tell you that Turkish groups come through there all the time. And many of them will say, we're coming back. We're coming back to take over. And so Erdogan, there was a big article in Israel Hayom the other day, very important article. The English translation is up on their website. It's called the Turkey-Qatar Alliance. And one of the statements in there was Qatar is Turkey's ATM. And I think that's very significant. We've seen Qatari money being spread all over the place. And they're both Muslim Brotherhood, Erdogan and Turkey, and the leadership of Qatar. And by the way, the mother of the Emir of Qatar just recently received like a humanitarian award from Georgetown University.
Wow.
One of the most evil women on planet Earth. Now, do you think Qatari money has any influence? They've been funding stuff I'm pretty sure it's Georgetown forever. And I believe, wasn't it Georgetown where Obama went to do a campaign speech back during one of the campaigns? And they have a statement over there like Jesus is Lord, and they covered it over.
I remember that. Yeah. So
I'm just telling you this, it's all of this stuff is connected.
Okay, so this brings me back to the Abraham Accords, because you have Qatar involved in the Abraham Accords. And correct?
They're not in yet.
Not in yet, but they're part of the conversation. Sure. And with that, with Qatar, they're also between them and Iran, the major funders of the terrorist attacks going on in Gaza. And Qatar is the major money behind all of the university protests against Israel, where you hear from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's Qatari money. And so you have all of these groups that we have a president that's saying, let's just all get together and get along. No. The only thing they hate more than each other is they hate Israel. So now they're able to gather their hatred around the nation of Israel, but trying to disguise it.
Tom, we live at a massive inflection point geopolitically and prophetically, and they're converging. And this Islamic thing, it's gone away, it's come back, and now it's back again. And everybody, we're not ISIS anymore, and they're doing it's. Tell me they're anything different than what the videos you're seeing coming out of Syria than what was going on in Syria and Iraq, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. There's no difference.
So you look at those things. By the way, I saw a picture the other day, and the caption was, Israel is starving the children to death in Gaza. And it had this little boy, I think in his mother's arms, and he's starving to death, you can tell. But the picture was actually from 2017 in Turkey. But, the media runs with that stuff and says, see what Israel, the lies are off the charts. But this brings me to another point, because we look at all of these groups and what you're talking about in Isaiah chapter 28, and I know we need to wrap up here in a minute, John, but I'm curious. Isaiah chapter 28, this is my interpretation. I believe it parallels Daniel chapter 9 and the covenant that is confirmed. In Isaiah 28, God says, therefore hear the word of the Lord, you scornful men who rule this people who are in Jerusalem, because you have said, we have made a covenant with death. With Sheol we are in agreement. When the overflowing scourge passes through, it will not come to us. For we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood we have hidden ourselves. So they clearly, it's going to be at a time when there's some wicked people that are in the Knesset running Israel. It's the way I look at that. And they enter into an agreement knowing the agreement is a lie. They know it's a scourge. We can tell as you read a few verses later, it's a scourge, it's a terror that's going to happen upon the people. They're terrorized, they're slaughtered. But they enter into an agreement knowing it's an agreement with liars. But they enter into it anyways. And they think, well, maybe we'll be okay if we enter into this agreement with liars. This goes back to what you were saying earlier about, is this going to be imposed upon the nation of Israel? And clearly, I look at that and just think, man, it's wild to see what's happening.
Yeah, I know we need to wrap up, but just give me 1 minute, because what's happening with Turkey, Syria is very significant. So I told you about the poster and everything. Right after the fall of Damascus, Erdogan, and then maybe before that poster came out, Erdogan was speaking at a rally in Istanbul or Ankara, and the crowd started chanting, "Chief, take us to Jerusalem," which is kind of interesting when you look at the chief prince language of Ezekiel 38. And I'm not saying that they are, but it's just kind of, again, it's the prophetic terms being used by secular, non-Christian people. And so it's, "Chief, take us to Jerusalem." He says, he responded, "Victory comes to the patient." One of his coalition partners a couple days later said, if Damascus has fallen, the fall of Jerusalem is imminent. Erdogan on July 12th gave a speech. I covered it in my update on July 13th. You can find it online. Go watch the end of it, about the last 10 minutes. And he talks about the fact that they have now made peace with the Kurds. The PKK, which was a terrorist group, they actually came to Ankara and had a ceremony where they burned their weapons. And that's kind of interesting language too. And Erdogan gave a speech, "We're all together now, we're all united, and we're going to unite Kurds, Turks, Kurds, and Arabs are going to unite, and we've got to deal with this thing in Jerusalem." This is in his speech just 10 days ago. And I'm just saying is that listen to what they say, not what we think they're saying, what they actually say. Read their speeches, read their articles, read their newspapers, which I do, and I know you do, and others do, because what is happening is incredibly significant from a geopolitical prophetic standpoint.
So, John, let me ask you a final question. You and I, we both primarily what we deal with when it comes to Bible prophecy, we tend to focus a lot of our attention on Israel and Jerusalem and what's surrounding there. You have your roundtable, your tech roundtable. I'll deal with other things too, but just for our viewers, why, to you, and I know you and I are the same in this, why is our attention drawn there, and why do we want to alert people to this? Why is it so important?
Well, because it's the central part of Bible prophecy. And so what we see in Bible prophecy, we look at Romans 11. I think this is what you're asking. We see this ultimate reconciliation that happens in Messiah. And so I've been thinking a lot through this. I know I've shared it with you and Roddy and I don't know if I could share it with Roddy yet, but with others about, I've been thinking about how does this happen? How do we get to the point where the natural branches are grafted back in? We know this is a promise that's coming. We see the restoration of these things, and maybe that's all part of this process, and it's all centered around Jerusalem and the Temple Mount and the nation of Israel. And to me, that's unmistakable. I don't know how you spiritualize that away. That's a big problem for me when I see other Christians do that. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, yeah, it's the epicenter, as Don Stewart has said, and I think Missler used to say this too. And well, I think you and I have both said it. What do you have? You have Israel's the hour hand, Jerusalem's the minute hand. The Temple Mount is the second hand when it comes to understanding the epicenter. And we could have everything else happening. We could have all the tech things happening. We could have the talk of a global economy. We can have the talk of all sorts of things, including nations of Ezekiel 38. But if the people of Israel weren't gathered back to the land and the focus wasn't starting to turn towards Jerusalem and peace, conversations, then it has no context for being the last days relevant to a generation. But
So let me rephrase what that coalition partner of Erdogan said in December of last year. He said, if the fall of Damascus has taken place, the fall of Jerusalem is imminent. So I'm going to turn it around and twist it just a little bit. If the second holiest Jewish site has been turned back over to Jewish management, is the turning over of the holiest Jewish site to Jewish management imminent?
Wow, that is great. John, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today, my first day back. By the way, everybody, as a reminder, both John and I have trips to Israel coming up in October. I'm so excited. And Huckabee, hey, he got some of Israel's policies changed just like that. That was great to see what God is doing. And we're going to both have a great time. You can check out both of our websites for information if you are interested in going on with either of us to the Holy Land. Let me tell you, it's always worth it. And I'll be in Santa Barbara. We have a conference there. We have one coming up in Texas too. Looking forward to seeing you guys in either Santa Barbara or Texas. And then finally, August 3, I'll be in Temecula, where I tried to get John to join me, but he can't. So David Towell's going to be joining me, which is totally awesome. And that's pretty good fill-in for you, John, having David Towell there.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bring in the A-team.
That's going to be great. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Make sure you connect with John at FBC. You can see the description up there on your channel. Click there. You're going to love everything he does. I know pretty much most of y'all already do. But looking forward to seeing you guys. Oh, today I'll have my news update coming up today in Prophecy, 5 o'clock Pacific time. God bless you guys. See y'all.